We have two incredible, dynamic guests today. I'm so excited to introduce them to you. So Michelle Sachs is co-host of the Modern Lady podcast. She's a homemaker living in southwestern Ontario with her husband and 4 children. She tries to balance her love of producing and reading with adventures of homeschooling and family life. You can follow her escapades on Instagram, and we invite you to follow her on Instagram and everywhere. Michelle, do you want to tell us just quickly how old are your kids?
Yeah, so our kids are, our oldest is 9, just turned 9 years old. And then we have twins. We have twin boys who just turned 7. And then our youngest is 4.5. So it's certainly busy, but it's all good. It's always
so it's an exciting time. And you're a homeschooler too.
First time. So I'll hold back the advice because I'm still we're 2 months in. We're all still here. It's going great.
And you know, thank you for, and you're even color coordinated today. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, a mom that has 4 little kids is color coordinated and she's smiling and homeschooling. I love it. So thank you very much for joining us, Michelle.
Thank you.
Lindsay, do you want to say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about, oh, wait a minute, I've got the official introduction here. Hold on. I've got to make sure that, so Lindsay is a mother of 4, and she's also the co-host of the popular podcast, the Modern Lady podcast. She, it got cut off here. So I know that her husband is terrible. I'm so embarrassed.
Right.
How embarrassing is that? But I know she's a mother of 4. I know she's the wife of a detective, which makes her fascinating and interesting. And are you homeschooling too? You're homeschooling.
I am still, so it's my 6th year of homeschooling. I have my 2 youngest being homeschooled. My one who's in grade 7 is back at real school, and my eldest, who is 14 this weekend, she is in an Ontario high school, so she's doing the 5 days on and the 5 days online, so she's half home. So I have a little bit of everything right now.
Oh wow! So that's I'm just so thrilled that you've joined us today. It's such an honor and pleasure. I have to tell you guys, you know, they're going to start their talk in just a minute, but a few years ago, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, I had this experience where deceased souls kept on popping into my brain. And I'm thinking like, what the heck, what gives here? And then something happened that was even a little bit more dramatic, is I would start thinking of somebody I hadn't seen or talked to in years. One guy was like, his name was Ed Smenzik, and I'm like, what the hell, why am I thinking of Ed Smenzik? I haven't seen him since who knows when. And then 2 or 3 days later, I would find out that he had died. And then, you know, a month later, I'm thinking, you know, Krystyna Zamoyski, why am I thinking about Krystyna Zamoyski? Oh my gosh, we used to go clubbing together, and like, what's ever happened to her? I know she was a pharmacist, and I know, let me try reaching her. I call her husband, oh, she had passed away. And it kept on freaking me out that these people that I was thinking about, I would find out, and it just happened recently with another friend of mine. I'm you're as old as I am, you know, you got a lot of friends looking back. And it's like she had passed away. And so I began to think either I was crazy or I was gifted. Like I wasn't sure like what was going on. And then I'm okay, I can't be gifted. And then a very dear friend of mine, some of you might know Henry from the Ave Maria Center of Peace. He suggested that I read this book, Get Us Out of Here by Maria Sima. And he said, the holy souls in purgatory need your prayers, Plorsky. And I'm like, what? And so I started, you know, a very, very strong devotion, offering masses, praying for them. And of course, my mother was a militant, you know, you can't fall asleep, pray a decade of the rosary for the holy souls in purgatory. So I didn't think anyone else loved those souls in purgatory as much as I do. And then I was chatting with Andrea Schreiber from Kitchener, who runs she says, you gotta talk to Lindsay. She has a society. I'm like, a society? I want to join the society. How do I join it? So, Lindsay, can you just give us a segue into your talk, a segue into how you got involved, and then it's all yours.
Absolutely. But first of all, we just want to thank you from Michelle and I. Thank you, Dorothy, for this chance to speak with you about this. It is a great honor for us. We also want to thank you for all the work you're doing in the Archdiocese and across Ontario. We really believe in the work that you're doing, especially connecting cross-generational mothers. Michelle and I really believe in that. We really believe in fostering mentorship, with the older women, and they can provide that spiritual motherhood. And for the new moms who really need sometimes a shoulder to cry on and someone to pray for them and to maybe bring them a meal. So you're doing great work with that. Thank you for that. So with devotion, there's three things I think that Michelle and I are really ultimately here to impress upon everybody today. And the number one thing is that purgatory is real. The number two thing is that purgatory is painful. And the number three thing is that only you can help, that you have the power, everybody here listening, to get those people out of purgatory and to help prevent yourself from going into purgatory, that this is like almost totally in our control. And so it's a great story of hope. And we want you to leave this feeling that way after we get through some heavier, maybe not so fun things about purgatory. But there's a lot to learn. And, my own love for the Holy Souls started, well, I'm a revert. I came back into the Catholic Church in 2008 when my husband converted from Anglicanism. And his conversion sparked within me a reversion. My reversion is basically a conversion, though. I wasn't really raised Catholic, and although I went to Catholic school my entire life, I didn't learn any of this stuff. So I learned it all as I got older. Just very briefly, we attended Mass in Kitchener for 4.5 years when we first came in, and then we found the traditional Latin Mass. And it was through the traditional Latin Mass that we started learning about these devotions, these things that so many people have forgotten about. And it was really in learning tons of devotions through the people that attend that Mass that we started really feeling drawn to the Holy Souls. And so there was a couple other little things that happened that I'll get to in a little bit, but my husband and I, God has really graced us in our marriage with kind of getting excited about the same things at the same time. So right when I got into the Holy Souls, he did too. And so we both were on board with doing what we could do as our family. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah, that's my story briefly. Michelle, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, so you know what, I was very lucky. I grew up in a practicing devout Catholic family, and my parents believed very strongly in bringing us, even as kids, to funerals and to visitations when family members would pass, or even friends of the family. We were brought along to all these things, and it was impressed upon us from a young age that this was important. So we may not have understood the depth of the theology behind purgatory as young children, but we certainly knew that this was something important. I would say that the very personal adult understanding and devotion to the Holy Souls began for me just a few years ago. It was when my twins were born. And now my kids were very good nappers, I have to say. So in the afternoons when they were babies, I did have a chance to read a lot. And it was in that winter that Pope Francis recommended that all Christians and all Catholics really need to read Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, I don't know about you after you've given birth to babies, but my brain space was not in such a place where I could handle Roman poetry. So what I did was I read the entire Divine Comedy on Sparks Notes online, like the Coles Notes version, literally the Coles Notes version. And I think that was great because it gave me commentary as well as the story itself. And I thought that the middle book of Dante's Purgatorio, on Purgatory, I thought that would be my least favorite. I thought it might be the most boring. I was trying to get to the heaven part, but it ended up being my favorite, my absolute favorite, because even though it's fiction, it really fleshed out in my imagination that these are real people And these souls are individuals still, and they are still asking for our prayers. And that led me on a journey to learn more about purgatory as an adult. And it brought me across the saints like Padre Pio and all of his interactions with holy souls that would appear to him and ask him to say masses for them and pray for them. And then I think what really solidified for me this devotion to the holy souls was a quote by Fulton Sheen, Venerable Fulton Sheen, where he says, hang on, I want to get this right. Oh, yeah, he says, as we enter heaven, we will see them, so many of them, coming towards us and thanking us. And we will ask who they are, and they will say, a poor soul you prayed for in purgatory. And I thought to myself, I want that. Like I would love to help people and then to be reunited with all of them one day. I think that's fantastic. So that was the catalyst for my devotion. And from there, just continuing learning. Yeah.
So I think we should define purgatory for, people who maybe don't know exactly what we're talking about. So I have a copy of something called the Modern Catechism. It's from 1970. And usually I'm traditional, so I'm like, oh, 1970. But I thought, no, I'm going to read this. And it actually had a great definition of purgatory. And so the quote is, a person not fully committed to Christ at the moment of death is not prepared for life in heaven. For him to share in the heavenly banquet, he must be freed from anything which stands in the way of his glory. His love must be purified. God accomplishes this work of purification in purgatory. And that sums up, that it is a charitable act of mercy on God's behalf for us, that this is it is a good thing that he wants us to be fully perfect in our love for him. And as Michelle and I will talk about in a little bit, we also will be desiring that the moment that we are face to face with Jesus at our judgment.
Now, I just wanted to make one little thing. And when you're talking to children, an analogy that I used to use, I used to teach, or I used to run a rosary club at my kids' elementary school, and did my best to teach the kids there to always offer a decade up for purgatory, for the souls in purgatory. And I used to say to them, imagine that you were going to a beautiful, beautiful party, a wedding, and that beautiful party or that wedding is heaven. Now, before you go to that party, imagine you have this beautiful, beautiful dress and it's white and there's this big stain on the dress. Could you go into the party with that stain? And they're like, oh no, miss, no. I said, well, what we're doing when we're praying for the souls that have died is we're scrubbing off that stain so that they can be freed to go to the party in heaven with the big dress. And the kids were like, oh, miss, and so I find that if you speak to children in that way, you can really capture their imagination. And I used to say that purgatory is like the dry cleaners, right? And so, but we only can do the cleaning, right? And so we want to pray for, grandma, or we want to pray for Mr. So-and-so who died because he had some stains on that shirt, and our prayers are going to get rid of those stains. So that's the way that, and the kids loved that idea of going into heaven, so anyway, that's my little 2 cents there.
I love it. Michelle, do you have, a little bit from scripture to maybe help us understand what purgatory is? And we know a lot of the saints talked about it as well. So maybe as we continue to define it, we can look to those sources.
Yeah. And what, kind of bouncing off what you were saying, Dorothy, with that great analogy, purgatory really is a place of free will, essentially. Like it is somewhere that we will want to be, to take that time to prepare, right? It's not a punishment. It's not a sentence. It's a great mercy, actually, from God to allow that, like, extra bit of time to purge ourselves, to make us fully ready to enter into his presence and his joy forever and for all eternity. So it's a great proof of God's great love and his great mercy for our souls, which is great. The idea of praying for the dead and of purgatory is actually scriptural. And one of the very first places where it mentions about praying for the dead and the benefits of that, and that it is a good thing, actually comes from the second book of Maccabees. That's one of the books right before you get into the New Testament. And it tells the story of Judas Maccabeus, who is the leader of the Jewish army. And he leads the army into battle. God grants them the victory in the battle. And afterwards, when they are collecting the bodies of the deceased, the fallen soldiers, they notice that some of them had been carrying pagan talismans on their person, which of course in Judaism and in Christianity too, idolatry is not good. So what Judas Maccabeus does is that he takes up a collection among the believers and sends that money to Jerusalem to buy the animals necessary to make an offering to atone for the sins of the deceased. And he does this because at the time they believed in the resurrection of the body at the end of time. So he wanted to ensure that these people, even though they had passed, there was still some atoning that could be done even though they had been deceased. And so that's really one of the first times in scripture we see this idea of praying for the dead. And there is a quote from the second book of Maccabees that says, "It is a good and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they may be loosed from their sins." And then you can go into the Old Testament too. There are examples, I won't get into them, but there are examples from some of the Gospels, the teachings of Jesus himself, that allude to this time after you die that your sins can be loosed, in the letters from Paul and St. Peter as well. So it is all through scripture as well, this idea of praying for the dead that the church really used and based over the first centuries in the early Christianity to form this official doctrine of purgatory. And that was first officially done in 1274, I think. The Council of Lyon was the first council. And from there, it developed to what we have today.
And like so many of the teachings of the church, it did start with the practice among the earliest Christians, right? And then they had been doing that practice. I mean, you can go through the catacombs and there is writing all over the tombs, begging for prayers, asking for people to pray for the dead. We've looked into too, like if whether purgatory is an actual place. And I mean, there's a lot of the early church fathers and St. Thomas Aquinas that describe it, as being adjacent to hell adjacent, I guess. But it's also a state of being. And we see that in the Gospels too, when Peter denies Christ and he turns around and he weeps. And so that is being in a state of purgatory within you. It's when he finally saw himself through Christ's eyes, and there is an immense, in Christ's perfect justice. When we see ourselves like that, we really turn around and weep because we see all of the chances we had to correct these things while we were still living. And we are then in his mercy given this chance to do that after we have passed away. Michelle, do you want to talk about what purgatory is actually like? And I think that this is something that's been watered down over the years. And I know that the priests that I have heard speak about it at church, and I don't know if any of you have even had a priest preach about it, probably not. I'm lucky enough to have priests who do speak about it in their homilies. And they have been very clear about how painful this purification process is. And I think that if we can really wrap our heads around that, we will feel such compassion for these suffering souls.
Yeah. There is a lot on this from the saints in particular about visions they have been granted of what purgatory is like. So I won't get into all of them, but I'll start with Saint Catherine of Genoa, and she was a mystic. She had lots to say about purgatory, but she does say that purgatory is as painful as hell, and that's something that several other saints will agree with in their visions of hell. Is that I think, wasn't it St. Thomas Aquinas that it's the same fire in hell as it is in purgatory? Now, so some people might be thinking, well, then, like, what? Why? There is a difference, though. The intensity of the suffering is the same. But the souls in purgatory are deeply consoled. And that's a really important note, because their pain is temporary and they know that, and they also know that it leads to heaven. So, going back to Dante for a second, in his book Inferno, which is his book on hell, it comes first, as Dante writes himself coming up to the gates of hell, there's a sign above the gates of hell that says essentially, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." And they talk about how that is the difference between the fire of hell and the fires that will purge you of your sins in purgatory. I know we talked about this yesterday when we were recording, Lindsay. We were talking about how are diamonds purified, like purified in fire. But it is like, fire has always traditionally been seen as something that purifies, right? And so that is the understanding of the flames. Now, it's also said that the hottest fire on earth will not even measure to the least of the flames in purgatory. So it is extremely painful. And the souls do suffer quite a lot. Now, we can help them in this, and that's what the point of this talk is not to, kind of fall into despair for these holy souls. I really want to emphasize the fact that their pain is abated considerably by the knowledge that this will end one day, and they're very grateful and joyful for that. Some of the other saints that talk a lot about this, just for your own further knowledge, if you want to look further into this, Saint Robert Bellarmine is another one that talks a lot about purgatory. Saint Padre Pio, like I mentioned before, he was visited by some of the holy souls, and they would share with him a little bit about what their experience is like, and that really impacted him in a big way to go and to pray and to say masses for the holy souls. And then the last thing, again, one last time going back to Dante, again, I know it's fiction. So straight off the bat, it's not Saint Dante. It's not, this is not part of the magisterium or anything, but it really does provide an interesting illustration of what this could be like. He talks about some of the different levels he sees as he goes through purgatory, and what some of the sufferings are like. And he talks about how in certain cases the punishment is connected in a way to what the sin was that they are in purgatory trying to purge. So for example, those who are in purgatory trying to purge their attachment to the sin of wrath are stuck in a big thick smoke. They can't see, they're blinded by their rage. We have that saying, right? A blind rage. But they're, even as they wander aimlessly trying to find their way, they're calling out encouragements to each other. They're calling out examples of great meekness, of the saints, of other heroic people of virtue. So there is this suffering that we see, and then there is the comfort that abets it. And you can find so much, and I encourage you to do that, because I think it pulls on our heartstrings very naturally and inspires us to then go and pray for the souls ourselves.
Now, I just wanted to pause for 1 second just to say hello to some of the, moms in the chat here. Lucy Pignatello is saying, "I'm new to this group and I love it already." Welcome, Lucy. Thank you for joining us. And Andrea is here from Kitchener-Waterloo area. She's doing a fantastic job ministering to moms in that region. Also, someone I think that's Peggy there that's saying, well, that doesn't sound like the dry cleaners to me. It's a little bit worse. And I do want to take just a second to pause on that thought. I do think it takes a tremendous amount of discernment and prayerful care in how we teach the Catholic faith, to children, right? Because I know that there was, a generation of Catholics that did preach the hell, the fire, the brimstone, and you're going to be punished for your sins, little Johnny, pick up the, and and if we, like, it just takes so much prayer to lovingly teach these things to children at an age appropriate time. So, when I was teaching praying the rosary with children, these were elementary school children. And so I did think that, the dry cleaners was good for little children, because I wasn't about to scare the living, no, won't use the word I feel like using, right? Scare the, and so it's always that the balance between, as a mother, right? The balance between a loving motherhood and a disciplinary motherhood, a compassionate teaching of the faith versus some of the harsh realities of the faith. And so we really do have to be careful as moms, because I know that a lot of little children end up leaving the faith because of the way that it was taught to them when they were little children. And so I beg you all, like I always say, why are we here? Why are we here? Why are we here? We are here to become better mothers, to become holier mothers, to provide a holy childhood for our children. And I think we're recognizing that this takes time, and that the modern day mom is so distracted and so pulled in 100 different directions that maybe she's forgotten her purpose, right? Maybe she's forgotten that her main role is to become holy and to create a holy childhood, and then all these other things are just besides. So anyway.
Dorothy, you know what? I just want to jump in and to your point. Very good point. I would not lead with everything that I just said to your young children. This was really to the moms themselves.
Yes, yeah, no. And so
but perhaps a really good way to balance this idea, because we want to start and lay the groundwork for them to go deeper into their faith as they mature appropriately, to describe it as this burning of the soul's desire to see God. The burning of their desire is so great. Like, you can use analogies of think about when it's coming up to your birthday and how you're so excited it almost hurts. Or Christmas even, right? It's the season. So if you are having this conversation with younger children, I agree. I think there's so much creativity that can be had if we know the faith ourselves, and we're doing all of this research and reading and learning and talking about the faith. Then I think it helps. It can only help us then when we turn to our young children and start to begin those beginning stepping stones to learning the beautiful things and the teachings of the faith.
And if I can say too, in my years homeschooling, I really think it depends on your children too, and having that closeness with your children, because some children can handle some things that other children can't. And that God has really equipped us as mothers to know what language to use with our children at the right times. And I think sometimes we do underestimate children. And I think that they actually can handle more complex topics like this that are sometimes a little scary, if it's tempered with our love. And if it's also then connected to doing these devotions. So it's not just us sitting and teaching it like this, right? And then it's putting them in the car and going to the graveyard, which can become this really neat thing. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, because we do that with our kids. In my house, I have never shied away from talking boldly about these things with my kids. And they have this incredible capacity to take it in and to understand it. I think sometimes as moms too, we think, well, I'm not a theologian. I don't understand. I don't know how to answer these questions when my kids bring it up to us. So then we don't bring it up at all. And then they find it out a different way later and they get misinformation. And so if moms are listening to this and they think, well, I don't know how to even start this with my kids, like what Michelle's saying, learn it yourself, spend a little bit of time. And when it comes from that place of love and devotion for these souls, the truth when tempered by love is what the church teaches. And then we start to build on those things as they do grow older. But I have never shied away actually from preaching the truth that the church teaches. And my kids have handled it really, really well.
See, but you got to be careful, because once you're as old as I am, you look back, like my children went to a private Catholic school where, they're praying the rosary every single day. It was very, very, very devotional. some of the kids that attended that school turned out, because like now they're all 25, right? Some of them turned out wonderfully balanced, and others, I can't tell you, they left the faith. We've seen some really radical, unhealthy behaviors because the kids just felt like, I got to bust out of this family. This is like, and they're not saying it at the time as a 10-year-old, right? And so I guess some of the benefits of being old, like I am, is that you look back and you say, okay, I didn't know the encyclicals like so-and-so, and neither did my kids. And my kids did drink ginger ale, and they even watched some TV, but they're still in, right? And so like sometimes we think we are doing absolutely the right thing at the time. That's why I'm always saying, pray with your children, pray for your children, and teach your children to pray, because you might be doing the wrong thing, even though your conviction is that you think you're doing the right thing, but you won't find out till they're 28. So, you know, and that's why I love the multi-generational groups, right? Like I always felt guilty that I wasn't like the encyclical mom. I didn't, you know, I wasn't as bright as the two of you are. And then I'm like, oh, some of the encyclical moms, they ended up having serious problems, right? And so, you know, we're all here together, and we're all here. So anyway, I'm going on too long. Sorry.
So I think we should talk about what we can do. And so what we can do as individuals and as families. And I can say again, that these are devotions that my family has done for years, and it has really strengthened our family. And then the truth is as well, when we are building this relationship with the holy souls, when they're released, as we've been saying, they're on your team. They're up in heaven. They're interceding for your family, and they're going to help your kids stay on track. I firmly believe that, because that's what the church teaches. And so all we're doing here is we are building our own extended family with these holy souls that can help us while they're in purgatory, but they cannot help themselves. So what can we do to help them? One of the first things that really inspired me was actually a secular documentary called Medieval Lives. It's a 3-part documentary. It's great. It's on YouTube, and it's a good birth, a good death, and a good marriage. And this series, the historian, who's not Catholic, who's just a British historian, she uses these letters called the Paston letters, which is this multi-generational set of letters between family members that have been perfectly preserved. They are from, I think, the 1400s. And it is one of the only times in history we actually get a look at the everyday lives of ordinary people. And so what you saw was their sacramental life, the liturgical living of these everyday Catholics in pre-Reformation England. And what they talked a lot about were these things called the chantries. And the chantries were chapels, often within a church building, where the priest's sole vocation was to pray continuously around the clock for the dead. And so these were all over England particularly. And so when you died, in your will, you would leave money, and the chantries would then pray for you over and over again. This was incredible. And there was this system set up in England as well, where the wealthy would establish hospices, and they would help the dying poor, which was the vast majority of everybody. They would help them in their dying days. They would take care of them. They would nurse them. And their names would go into the wealthy donors. Their names would go into, these chantry systems one day. And as they were taking care of the poor in their suffering as they were dying would be praying for the names in the book of life there. So it was this continuous cycle of the rich helping the poor and the living helping the dead. It was really part of their community. And that was called a Purgatorial society. And that, after watching it, I'm like, well, is there still Purgatorial societies? Because I've got to start one. So I spoke with my priest, and he said there really aren't any. There are a few communities of monks and nuns and priests throughout the world who you still can register with to have prayers for your family. But it is very rare, especially for lay people. So I have here this book. So my family, we started it in 2017. And we just went to Chapters and just bought a regular book. And we started collecting names of the dead of our friends and family. And we started writing them in. And we have over 300 names now. And it's something that my husband and I have committed to with our 4 children, where every Friday we read every single name out loud. My children have almost all of the names memorized. We don't know these people. These people have become family to us. I can't wait to meet them in heaven one day. The kids love them too. And so anyways, one of the things that we do with this Purgatorial Society under the guidance of a priest who also offers masses for the people in our book, and we will continue adding people to the book. So we've prayed a daily family rosary for over 8 years. So we're used to doing a daily rosary. So on Fridays, we pray our rosary. We read the names from the book. We pray the litany for the holy souls. We all get on our knees and pray an indulgence prayer before a crucifix. And I think that's about it. It's about an hour of our Friday night devotions that we do as a family. And my kids love that time. And so it's just, yeah, those people have really become part of our family. So you too can start a Purgatorial Society. Any of you just get a book, start writing in people's names and commit to praying for them. It is nothing. It's nothing in our week, but we have really, really drawn close to the people in this book.
Oh my gosh, Lindsay, my heart is just overflowing for just your beautiful, my heart's overflowing for the love that you have, for the, just the witness, everyone's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. What a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful idea. And I wanted to make a comment because someone said, they're kind of saying, hey, Dorothy, those kids that have left the church will come back. The seed has been planted. I love these sessions because I think we all stretch one another, right? We all stretch one another. I know that Lindsay is, stretching me. I'm a bit of a lazy person. And so I have a little pouch on my refrigerator. And every time I get a prayer card of a person who dies, I put it in there. So I have all of them there. And so then I'll gather the prayers and then I shuffle them like a deck of cards. It's terrible, and pray for them. I think it's just amazing. Congratulations. My hat's off to you, Lindsay, that you're doing this together as a family. And I wanted to acknowledge all of the moms that are out there. I know a lot of you are out there and saying, oh my gosh, but I can't even get my husband to go to mass with me. All of us are in a different place, right? All of us that we're here. Lindsay's very blessed that she's got a husband that's on the same page, right? Michelle, is your husband on the same page in terms of the faith and practicing the faith? And I don't know if that's too personal of a question.
Oh no, he's not in the Midday Mom session, so
talk about him.
Do you know what? My husband is a convert to the faith. He converted about 10 years ago, and so he's still learning quite a lot of this. And it's been really interesting for me as a cradle Catholic to be on this journey with him. So I would say that this devotion to the Holy Souls, he's a very good man. He's very patient with me. And he will go along with things, even if he's not entirely sure about the history and the doctrine and fullness of the faith. But I think that's an interesting point you bring up, Dorothy, because there are saints in the church that have been in that exact situation. And I think one thing we can draw from their example is that, especially with something like this, of starting a Purgatorial Society, praying for the deceased members of our family and community, that is something that you can start even on your own. And while you're praying, maybe you can ask those souls to help you bring the other people in your family on board. That's the beauty of the communion of saints that we talk about in the church, right? We have the church triumphant in heaven. Those are the saints. The church suffering, who are the souls in purgatory, and then the church militant, who are us. We are the militant ones who are able to still do the work and procure these merits to ask for help. And our brothers and sisters in the family and body of Christ and in the church, still, even after they've passed from this earthly life, they will still help us with that. So, all we need, as Lindsay said, all we need is a notebook and to get writing down some names and start praying. It's always, everything in the church is always a message of great hope and empowerment and encouragement, I find. And I think that the enemy will tempt us to wait before things are perfect. Until things are perfect,
Absolutely.
starting, right?
Until our husband's on board or until the kids are willing to listen, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's never the right time.
And
You can
so
pray.
I want to just shout out a word of encouragement to Lucy here. She says, my daughter was raised Catholic and doesn't go to church, but I pray that she returned to the faith one day. And I always tell her I'm praying for you, and tell her to be a good person. Rema, our mother's group leader, now in year 6 at St. Benedict's Parish, she says she's a mother's group leader there. This has inspired me to dedicate my mother's group to do this. So that's fantastic. And you know, this is why, I know you guys are tired of hearing me say this, but this is why mother's group is so important. And why is it so important? Because if I meet someone like Lindsay today, and she's a powerhouse because her and her husband are united, and she's got these practices that, you know, I'm not doing. Meeting Lindsay today is forcing Pilarski to raise the bar. I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute. And then today, when I meet someone like Michelle, I think, Michelle, you know what? I married a convert too. And you know what you have to do when you marry a convert, you have to be so careful. And I'll tell you why you have to be so careful. Because you both weren't raised with the same faith traditions. You, as Dorothy Pilarski, I'm not talking to you, Michelle, you can possibly backslide because he doesn't have the 30 years or 20 years of formation that you did. And so then you go, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Then, you know, my husband's family thinks that I'm crazy. You know, none of them practice anything at all. And so then when I go, you know, to Christmas over there, or if I go there, then I'm suddenly feeling weakened, right? I'm feeling weakened. But then I go to mother's group and I meet Lindsay, I meet Rema, I meet, you know, my sisters in Christ who fortify me, inspire me, and say, Pilarski, you're backsliding, right? And
so can I say that this
please,
is
please.
Okay, the message. So Michelle and I host our podcast, the Modern Lady Podcast, and Michelle and I are both big lovers of the military. And so a lot of our episodes, we do etiquette tips, we do fun stuff, we do homemaking, but we also want to form women into fighters, because when you can change the heart of a woman, you change society. And so we want women who are washing their dishes to know, because that's what I do all day, and that's what Michelle does. And we, you know, changing kids and wiping bottoms, all of those things. These are all efforts that contribute to our vocation, but contribute to our sanctification. And so when it is an incredibly liberating and powerful thing, not to plug the podcast again, but for those of you who think, well, I'm so blessed that my husband's on board. My husband and I, we were nearly divorced. The whole story is on a podcast episode. I was a feminist Wiccan. He was this close to being ordained in the Anglican Church. There was a whole long story there. We didn't just end up as two people who love Purgatory together. We had to get there. And do you know how you get there? By just starting. And then God's grace builds upon grace, builds upon grace. And then he will start to reveal to your heart, just like you were saying, Dorothy, when you started thinking about deceased people, God will start doing those little tugs about what things he thinks your family is ready for. And so we either go, okay, God, I'm going to trust your will for my family, or not right now. But we shouldn't say not right now, because he will, whatever little offering we can give him like this, he multiplies it, he blesses it, and it just pays us back. I always say that our Purgatorial society is selfish. I come right out and say that it is an investment, like a rental property or, you know, a 401k. It is an investment in our retirement, because those souls will be getting me out of Purgatory and will hopefully be getting my children out of Purgatory. There's one thing I want to say as well. And I was saying this to you earlier, Dorothy, that the truth is, guys, I called every church in Waterloo region. There was about 30, 35 churches I called 3 years ago. And I asked how many people attended their All Souls Day Mass. And the average number was 6. And so if there are only those 6 people, they're praying for the holy souls. What happens when I die? What happens when you die? What happens when my children die? Who are going to pray for them? It starts now. And so this is the message that Michelle and I always want to say. I love that you are inspired by it, Dorothy, and we get inspired too. We always say, when you hear another Catholic woman speaking, don't compare yourself to her and think, well, I just can't do that right now. Think, well, like, can I? Let me try. Like, be inspired by it and be encouraged by it.
Yeah, and so our mothers group meetups have 4 components, and I don't want any of you to think that this is actually a mothers group meetup, because this is just one component of our mothers group meetup. We always have, I don't want to get into it now, but we always begin our mothers group meetings with a tremendous amount of prayer. We have a ministry prayer, specifically for moms to reclaim motherhood as a vocation, as a calling from God. The 4th part of our meeting, I'll skip the 2nd and the 3rd, I'll go right to the 4th, is always some type of call to action.
Yes.
So after this session, between now and next week, what do you feel the Holy Spirit calling you to do? It is my hope that after this session to get together with Lindsay and Michelle, that you are called concretely to do something. It might be to, subscribe to the Modern Lady podcast and start listening to Lindsay and Michelle regularly. Please do that. Someone else might be called to get Maria Sima's book and read Maria Sima's book. Another person might be called to say, okay, every day from this day moving forward, I'm going to pray a rosary specifically for the holy souls in purgatory. That's what I'm going to do. Okay. One thing that kind of like drives me a little bit crazy about this time of year is that people are jumping to Advent, and I say we still have a whole week to focus on the holy souls, right? We still have, how many more days do we have left in November?
Especially this year. Can I touch on the indulgence for those who don't understand from the Vatican? So we were given this amazing opportunity this year due to all the people lost through coronavirus, who maybe were denied the sacraments or that kind of thing. So the Vatican gave us this incredible chance to earn an indulgence for the holy souls. It gets me so excited. If you think I'm excited about purgatory, just indulgences. So for just very briefly, those of you who aren't familiar with indulgences, it's like if your child breaks the neighbor's window, you know what? They're going to say that they're sorry and they're going to be forgiven, but somebody still has to pay for the window. Okay. Right. So we have our eternal forgiveness, and that was purchased by our Lord Jesus Christ. But we still have to pay for the sins that we did. And so that's our time there. Now we can earn either a plenary or a partial remittance of that time in purgatory for ourselves, or in the month of November for the holy souls. And so you still have a little bit of time there to visit a cemetery. You need to go to confession. You need to receive the Eucharist. You need to pray for the Pope. There's a few conditions. They're on every Catholic website. You can find the conditions to earn an indulgence, but you and your family could literally free somebody from purgatory. Like tonight, go to a cemetery. My kids love doing it. We sit in the car as the sun's setting. It's a little creepy. It just really connects them to the idea of the supernatural and to the otherworldly and to our universal family. So there's still a little bit of time left that your family can get somebody out of purgatory.
Yeah. Can you tell me, because I've only ever heard this, and maybe you can tell me whether it's true or not. Is it true that like a ridiculous amount of souls get freed from purgatory on Christmas Day?
I haven't heard about Christmas Day, but Good Friday, there's a lot of devotions throughout. I think that we need to be very careful when we hear even something like the St. Gertrude's prayer, which can release 1,000 souls. I mean,
I love that prayer. Don't
it's a great prayer.
This is St. Gertrude's.
No, I love that prayer too, but I think that we can tend to go, boom, done, say that, said that prayer, and these 1,000 souls are out. It really has to come with us changing our lives, right? Prayer is meant to change our lives too, so that we really form our own heart to just have this devotion, not just to read off a prayer and then X number of people are released. That's when people look at Catholics and go, well, you're just doing like magic spells and you can say this and then these people are. It's really about fostering that love and then having trust and hope that God is going to release the exact amount that he thinks should be released right then. But yeah, there are different times in the year where those prayers are a little bit more efficacious. So there is a great thing that everybody can pray on Good Friday. And Michelle, do you have any other awesome devotions that you think that people could start like today?
Yeah, so actually going along with that, I think I did read somewhere that also Marian feast days are big days to pray for the holy souls in purgatory too, because as our spiritual mother, she has a great love for those holy souls that are so close, right? So close to reaching heaven. So that's something to keep in mind. I did want to say that something that I think we as moms forget all the time is the merits of living our vocations well. So like all of these things are amazing and good, but like what you were saying, Lindsay, it has to come from good intention, deep from our hearts with pure intention. And I think that the intention is to unite our will to God's will as closely as possible and keep striving for that in our daily lives and in our daily tasks, right? So there is so much. I don't know if you ever have to say to your kid, they do something really nice, but it may not be what you asked them to do right now. And so there's a little bit of pleasure lost, we'll say. And I sometimes think of that in terms of myself with God, right? Like I could be spending 5 hours of prayer and devotions in my room, but if that means that I let some other things slide that pertain to my vocation as a wife and as a mother, it's a little bit less efficacious, a little bit less effective possibly than, having to go and serve my family. St. Francis of Rome says, sometimes she must leave God at the altar and find him in her housekeeping. I have that quote right above my kitchen sink and I love it because I'm very tempted towards that. I would very much like to go to the church all the time and to pray. And even sometimes right now, the church may not even be open for prayer anytime you want to, right? So I think it's really important that we develop this understanding of our vocations as this huge opportunity to procure merits and to offer up our work as a prayer, and that our striving to get better and better as wives and mothers are also a prayer that we can offer to God on behalf of the holy souls. And so to be emboldened by that and to go after it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and I think that I had the great blessing of meeting Susan Tassoni. She's written a number of different books on the holy souls in purgatory. And she is a single woman who has devoted her life and single, and she's in her late 60s. Okay, so we're talking single, and she has devoted her whole life to propagating the truths of the holy souls. And she has written dozens and dozens of books on the holy souls. And she's always saying, like, don't waste today, do something for a holy soul. And I want to share with you a little story. I think many Catholics too forget to offer up their suffering, right? We forget, and so I'll never forget the day that my mom was knocked over by a dog in a park, and she was in her late 70s, and she's laying there in a park, knocked over by a dog, broken hip. The dog owner left her, and someone on a movie set found her, called the ambulance, and we get called to the hospital. And she had taught us always, offer up your suffering, offer up your suffering. And so they had to straighten out my mother's, hips, and she had osteoporosis before she went into surgery. So here I am in emergency, right, with my mom, with my sister. She's got this broken hip. She's in excruciating pain. And I'm like, Mom, like, would you offer up some of your suffering for my past sins? And she's screaming, and she goes, are you kidding? I got enough of my own. I'm offering that. so whenever we are suffering, whether it's through, you know, a fight with our husband or a sleepless night, or, you know, a 21-year-old that is removing all religious icons from their, you know, room for whatever reason, like whenever we're experiencing suffering, to remember to say in our brains, not out loud, but to remember to say, dear Lord, I offer up this suffering. I unite my suffering with your suffering on the cross for the redemption of souls and the release of souls from purgatory. Like by making that simple. And so then whenever you're tempted either to get angry or whenever you're tempted to just, you know, self-pity is so dangerous, right? And I think that COVID is such an opportunity for people to feel sorry for themselves. So I'm saying, instead of feeling sorry for yourself, take that suffering and say, Jesus, I unite this suffering with your suffering on the cross, and I offer it up for, and then insert your intention, right?
Yeah, you know what? So, and we don't even have to wait for when suffering comes to us, right? We can make little mortifications throughout the day. So don't put the sugar in your coffee tomorrow morning and say, I'm offering this up for the Holy Soul. You think it's just sugar. Oh my goodness. God will be so pleased that you decided to do that with that heart. Again, who knows who he's going to release? It's the simplest little things. My kids are so used to coming up to me and going, I've already offered it up, Mom, but ... because we're always like, offer it up. But you know, I hope all of you have a holy water font at your front door, because whenever we bless ourselves, we always sprinkle a little for the holy souls. That is actually, like many saints have talked about, how that little sprinkling of holy water done with our pure heart, it's like a refreshing wave coming to them in the middle of the fire. It's a second of reprieve. And so there are so many little things that we can do. And it's the more we do that, the more we really do familiarize ourselves with them. And then when we do that, we understand our place in the universal church, right? And that, again, with COVID, we feel so isolated. But when we realize that we are part of a church that is beyond time and space, that we are connected to the saints in heaven and to those souls that are suffering there, and to each other, this network of praying moms, it's really hard to feel lonely, right? When you realize all of that. And so I know that it takes a little practice, because it's so countercultural. No one talks about this. Again, you're probably not hearing about it in your local parish. But when you really do start to take on this devotion, and I know Michelle will agree, your heart really opens up, and you really do feel like you are part of the ancient tradition of this, of praying for the dead. And it isn't until heaven that we will see the results of that one day. But you know, we are not just alone in our houses, even when it feels so lonely.
Yeah, and so we're not. And I'm hoping that, you know, y'all enjoyed this session. I know that I've learned a lot. I just wanted to shout out, say hello to Lauren Hartman. This has been my first Midday Moms and my first foray into Catholic moms. Thank you so much for this. I'm excited to pray for the souls in purgatory and to plug the KW Catholic Moms group, aside from just following it on Facebook. So I always like extending a very, very warm welcome to, you know, first-time moms. I always say you either love us or hate us, you know, like, but thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, do you have some kind of closing thoughts for our session today? What are some closing thoughts?
You know what, I think that in closing, if you take something away from this, it's that you are a part of a family, and it is your earthly family, yes, but more so than that, you are part of the church family that extends all the way from this life to beyond, to eternity. And so in that case, as Lindsay said, we're never alone, and the church understands all different situations and levels of faith and growing faith and deepening faith. And when you feel hopeless or helpless, especially in times like this, the church always has something for you to do to help someone else. Mm-hmm. We've been given our marching orders, going back to our army references we love so much, right? we've been given marching orders that we can do within our own homes. And we're very, very blessed to have those. They're a great consolation, not only for ourselves, to feel like we're making a difference, to feel like we're still in control of that which is most important, which is the eternal, and to not only live in that hope and that peace and that joy, but then to go out now and to share it with your children, with your family, and with your community. And by that, we will change the world.
And Lindsay, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, it's just like what Michelle was saying. I think so many times, you know, I've been a stay-at-home mom, and you know what, guys, I don't drive. I'm 40 years old. I don't drive, and I live in a place where nothing's walkable. And so it can feel very isolating. I always joke that when I found out that that the situation everybody's in and being isolated right now is just what my life is. I didn't realize I was living in quarantine for the last 12 years, but I have been. So we often think, what can I do, right? So many of us have this fire and this passion where we want to go out and we want to change the world, but we are home, and we're home with these beautiful children. And so we think, well, I guess I'm just here for now. We'll have to put that off. But no, your very actions, like we've been saying throughout all of this, have universal ramifications. Our very actions, the very actions of just praying for these people. I mean, what is bigger than that you can get these people out of purgatory? And then, like we're saying, the world is falling into chaos and disorder and darkness. It's always been like that, but it seems like it's more so right now. And so I think that if what we're doing, if all of these souls are getting released and they're going into heaven, we are just aiding in that heavenly army being built up to help fight what is going on here right now. So that's all you're doing, right? While you're folding laundry, you're building an army in heaven. So I think it's incredibly empowering.
Yeah, and it kind of just, you know, in closing, I have a very strong conviction that each mother, when she gives birth to a child, she is given a deposit of grace to raise that child, to form that child. And it seems like moms today are just too busy to access the graces they've been given, right? And some of you know that, you know, I used to deliver corporate training programs across Canada, across the United States, across Australia, across New Zealand, across, you know, I always like to say I got paid to deliver seminars in Hawaii. But the one thing, moms used to come running up to me after, always, you know, saying, oh my gosh, I missed years of my children's life. And moms would come running up to me after a training program and say, where do you get that energy? Where do you get that enthusiasm? Where do you get that strength? And the reason I stopped training at the Schulich Executive Education Center, if the truth be known, is because I couldn't say, you know where I get it all from? I get it from the daily Eucharist. I get it from the rosary. I couldn't do that in a corporate environment. And so what I'm trying to encourage each and every one of you listening today, that no matter what you do, is to make receiving the graces of your vocation of motherhood as the #1 priority. You know, people will sometimes say to me, Dorothy, you are against working mothers. I'm like, no, I'm not. I worked more than most women that I know. But what I am against is a woman, a mother at her deathbed, having regrets about how she spent her time. That's what I'm against. You know, I always say St. Gianna Molla, yes, she was a working mother. We've got all mothers on the entire different spectrum. But if you're too busy to access the vocation, if you're too busy to access the graces that have been given to you, to your primary vocation, there is a problem. And the other thing I wanted to say is that God does have supernatural means of providing. The problem, quote unquote, with many moms today is that they think that God can't replace their income, and so that they themselves have to do it all. You know, they have to be bringing in the money, they have to be doing the cleaning, they have to be doing the cooking, they have to be, you know, God can double and triple your income if you follow his will. right? And I don't know what that will is, but I think sometimes modern day moms, if I could say, have forgotten that they can fully rely on God. They don't have to rely just on themselves, right? And even as our children grow older and they leave our houses, they might not do exactly what, well, we need to entrust our children to our Blessed Mother. We can't do it all. I always say our Blessed Mother loves our children more than we do. Anyway, I always say my magnificent obsession is to revive motherhood as a vocation. I hope someone's heart has been touched today. If you want, you can go to the website. If you end up purchasing any books, I will ask you, I'm just gonna show you one last thing, is if you go to our website, let me just, if I can find it here. If you go to our website here, CatholicMomsGroup.com, and if you want to make a donation, you can make a donation up there. You can make a donation there, or if you want to purchase any books at all, I'm going to suggest something here. Hold on, where we are. If you want to find mothers groups, you hit find a group. All of them are listed there. We have a calendar of all of our mothers group things. We've got our workshop, the Catholic Mom Summit. Hold on. Oh, under who we are, under support our ministry, if you go to support our ministry, and you click on that link, it will take you to the Amazon links so that a small percentage of your purchases, so if you enter Amazon through support our ministry, then we'll get a very tiny percentage of, because we're trying to grow the ministry. I would love to have a full-time social media coordinator. I'd love to have the things that we could do. I've got so many emails, I can't respond to them all. Anyway, I'm going on too long. It's 3:13. Forgive me for going on too long. Next week, we have a special guest. Father Gregory Merkley is joining us, and he's going to be sharing a reflection on what is consecration. Some of you have heard consecration. What does that even mean? How do you become consecrated? So anyway, we will see you next week. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
We're praying for you, and as I always like to say, I'm so glad we had this time together just to have a laugh and sing a song. Seems we just get started, and before you know it, comes a time we have to say so long. Remember, purgatory is real. You can help the souls in purgatory by praying for them, making sacrifices, ordering masses, and remember to follow Lindsay and Michelle on the Modern Lady Podcast. Modern Lady Podcast. I hope you guys come back and join us on Midday Moms. Okay? Bye now. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.